Join James Tambalebi for Ask the Expert.
Hello and welcome to Ask the Expert. Today's edition will look at the practice domestic violence, and I have as my experts Patrick H. Walker, a lecturer at the Department of Sociology, Forabi College, University of Sierra Leone. Welcome, Mr. Walker.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Levy.
Can we start by giving an overview of this practice?
Yes, you see, we will start by saying that domestic violence is a social problem. And it's a very, very major social problem in our societies today. You see, domestic violence is a long existing phenomenon that is more common than love in homes in our societies. Every family suffers violence of some kind based on their culture or how that culture perceives domestic violence. The family is seen as a place where people should have love, where concern should be expressed for members, and where people should seek for cover when threatened by the larger society. But if the family starts to give out what we could call violence onto its members, then something is wrong somewhere. When you actually want to look at the idea of domestic violence, you want to look at it from the backdrop of what Michael Foucault talked about: struggle for power in our society. It is always a situation wherein those who are in the higher echelons of power, those who have stronger say over the weak in society, will always leash out their authority on others in a negative way. And so Foucault simply establishes the fact that what you call sexual harassment, what you call domestic violence, is as a result of those who are placed in the higher echelon of society, even from the family point of view, the father, so to speak, all right, in the high position of the family, will always want to unleash some amount of power on the lesser people within the family. Like, you want to talk of the mother, you want to talk of the children, you understand? And so it's a question of asserting my authority. That's why most sociologists are today saying that the family is becoming a myth. What do we actually mean? That some of the functions, some of the roles which the family should perform in giving comfort, in giving protection, the family has kicked out, and therefore you see a lot of violence within the family. But then there is a popular thesis which is actually telling us that violence is learned through modeling and transmission across generations.
What does that mean?
You see, if you find a husband beating up the wife today and the children, beating them up, this is a practice that the husband did not jump into. The husband must have witnessed, must have experienced people within his vicinity, his home, once he's growing up. Either the father, either adults within his vicinity beating up other people. That's what we are saying. That in fact, it is not something people jump into. They must have seen, they must have experienced it, and therefore they also become instruments to perpetuate it.
Okay, thanks for this explicit overview of the practice domestic violence. Now let's talk about the definition. What does domestic violence actually mean?
You see, my dear brother, in actually coming out with a definition, one has to be guided as to a practice that is acceptable and a practice that is not acceptable. What is normal and what is abnormal. But what we are saying here is that violence is viewed as an act carried out with perceived intention of causing physical pain or injury on another person. Violence here is based on culture of a particular society. But when you look at what William Good actually propounded on, he looks at violence as a legitimate source at the disposal of family members, and it will be used whenever one attempts at alleviating a conflict that fails. Violence here is examined on family basis. Others view violence as a means of trying to demonstrate one's power or adequacy, like I told you of what Foucault is actually propounding on. There is a way of telling people that in fact I am in authority, and therefore every other person must be under my control. And one way to tell them is to unleash some amount of violence on them to show that I am in authority. All right? And so you want to say that in fact violence is promiscuously viewed and is seen everywhere. Historically, I want to say, it becomes a theme of evolution. Psychologically, it is the corollary of human nature. Educationally, the enemy of learning. Socially, the wrong road to change. In essence, the implementation of change in the families through violence generates family disorder and terror. So, when you look at it critically, it is physical, it is emotional, but it is that which exposes family members to pain, be it physical, be it emotional, being unleashed from a higher point of authority.
You're listening to Ask the Expert with James Tamba Levy.
Now, talking about those dimensions, now let's look at the types of domestic violence. Can you throw some light?
Yes, my brother, I have already given you an insight into it. But then we will dwell on the various types of violence. Now, as domestic violence is actually becoming a cliche for most organizations and groups in our society, it is categorized, however, for better and proper understanding and to distinguish it from other forms of violence exhibited in the home. Domestic violence can be looked at from physical violence, normal violence. This is a bit funny when you say normal violence, but then we'll look at it, and emotional violence or abuse. To have a take on physical violence, such violence produces great outrage and the saddest emotions portrayed. It takes into consideration the behavior of throwing objects, pushing, grabbing, threatening with knife or a gun, using knife or gun or physical hands to actually inflict pain upon the people found within a particular vicinity, say the family. It is actually using some amount of physical force to assert one's authority upon the people found within that particular vicinity. And when you look at it, this is what that is actually common in most of our societies today. In fact, like I said earlier on, we take it as a cultural thing. You want to actually say it is wrong. But then, in certain cultures, if women particularly are not beaten, if they are not are beaten, so to speak, they are not considered to be loved. Then the question comes in: acceptable practice and non-acceptable practice. In that particular society I'm talking about, which is common in most parts of our society today, you realize that some women feel if they are not beaten, they are not loved. But that, to me, is actually unleashing violence on people wrongfully. You understand? And therefore, I will say, in that direction, if you look at what we have called or defined as domestic violence, then we cannot be correct, because that particular individual or those people consider violence as a way of showing love. If you do not beat me up, then it tells me you do not love me. But then that takes into consideration physical violence. Now you want to say normal violence. This is what people may call normal. It is commonplace to slap, to push, to shove, to spank. It most of the time is considered as normal violence or an acceptable part of raising children. When children go wrong in the home, we slap them, we spank them, we push them, we shove them. But then, to me, as a sociologist, I consider this to be violence, though people may want to call it normal violence. That small beating, a lot of statements from religious circles may want to endorse that. If you spare the rod, you spoil the child. You understand? But actually, I equally agree that some amount of spanking should be given, but that we should inflict pain on children and on other members of the family, then it is out of the way. All right? Because I believe good behavior, norms, and values can be actually cultured without using physical force. Without using physical force. It's a question of approach.
Yeah, you also spoke about emotional violence.
Yes, emotional violence. This is more insidious and more damaging, but it is difficult to measure. Many people do not perceive being scorned, ignored, criticized, ridiculed by loved ones as emotional violence or abuse.
Is it the same as psychological violence?
Of course, it is psychological violence. I create a particular picture in your mind, and you believe that in fact I am not doing anything wrong to you, but that picture created in your mind continuously gives you pain. You understand? It gives you pain. I give you a mental torture. That mental torture continues to give you so much pain, right? That kind of, for instance, most people do not consider it as violence. You have your wife, you love your wife, and you allow your wife to actually catch you in extramarital affairs. That wife loves you, but that incident of catching you with another woman, say in your own bedroom, you understand, gives complete torture. That's violence unleashed psychologically onto that woman. And that person, that mental picture created in that individual brings some emotional imbalance. All right? And so violence can also be exhibited in that way. You understand? And men have that tool. The women, they want to shove, to actually push away. Women, they find a fellow woman to actually create that picture so that you'll be caught and that woman goes with a mental torture and the man goes scot-free. All right?
So how widespread is this practice?
You see, as we go to the widespread nature of violence, I want us to be reminded again of what Ferrari states. That violence is initiated by those who oppress, who exploit, and who fail to recognize others as persons, not by those who are oppressed, exploited, and unrecognized. To maintain dominance over others, the victims of violence themselves, having imbibed the view that the powerful need to maintain their authority over the powerless through coercion, also mete out violence onto others even less powerful. So it becomes a chain kind of situation. If I am exposed to violence all of my life, I find an opportunity of actually unleashing violence equally to other people. That's why I have said that if children grow up in environments where they see papa beating up mama, papa beating up their sisters, and they are, boys, taking an African situation that we live under a male chauvinist culture, a patriarchy culture, wherein the man is always right. And that question of the rightness, quote unquote, of the man is where the problem lies. All right? And so you realize that if that boy grows up in a society or in a family wherein beating is the norm for correcting wrong behavior, then that boy is also going to beat the wife and his own children. All right? That's why we say it is cultured throughout the ages and passed on. If the children do not see beating, they do not experience beating, there is every likelihood that they will find other measures in solving their conflict at home. But if there is always beating, which has become part of their life throughout their ages onto adulthood, they are going to copy that mechanism also to correct conflict that they come across. So, it is my advice to families, it is my candid opinion I should express to families all over this particular city and the country at large, that for every one moment in your life, avoid domestic violence, or else the children will grow up with it. People around you will grow up with it, and they will also use it later in life. For children, they say, learn by imitation, and culture, once nurtured, cannot easily be thrown away.
You're listening to Ask the Expert with James Tamba Leby.
Okay, let's talk about the causes now.
Yeah, you see, as we discuss, Mr. Leby, you want to agree with me that power, the source of power and how we unleash it is one cause of domestic violence. That I have authority here and everybody should listen to me. If they do not listen to me, I use my authority, is one source of domestic violence or cause of domestic violence. Again, we cannot actually move it away from economic conditions actually happening in our society. The economic conditions people face can actually give them some kind of emotional, some kind of imbalance, in which they will always find a situation wherein they can unleash their anger. They will always, like the father goes out for the rest of the day, fending for the family. He does not have anything to come back with. You understand? And the slightest condition that does not agree with his authority at home, he will unleash anger. You understand? So you look at the economic condition in our homes, you understand, will also be a good source for violence. You understand? And like I said, societal, the environment we live in, this takes me to one major cause of violence. You understand? What has been described as ecology of violence, which people like Derendorf, Parsons have actually dwelt on very seriously. They call it ecology of deviance. If children or people grow up in societies wherein violence is unleashed almost every other time, there is every tendency for those people to use that methodology in solving their problems. You understand? Like I said, it's the violence becomes a habit when the powerless do not resist violence in a productive way. This is very serious. The powerful enjoy meting out violence to the powerless, especially where the environment is conducive. For instance, there is a complete culture of silence. Children, obey your parents. Wives, be submissive to your husbands. We agree with all of these. But that is the background from which men in our societies actually unleash violence on people. You understand? And you realize that apart from the culture of violence, this breeds a culture of impunity. You understand? Because people do not talk about it. People believe it's a cultural practice. It should be accepted. People will continue to do it.
So are there measures or safeguards to control this very negative?
Of course,
practice?
my brother. You see, it is one great philosopher who once said that sociologists should be the high priest of society. They should give prescriptions to problems that exist in the society, how they could be resolved. And at this particular juncture again, I want to actually say that if I find myself in this position to educate society on a practice like this, I will say family members, particularly to the men, husbands, men in society, and boys, stop unleashing violence in your homes. The children will copy it. Having said that, I believe the law must be implemented. Thank God, today in Sierra Leone, because of the new policing system, you have in every police station a special unit that deals with domestic violence. You understand? Violence unleashed on people based on the family front. And that has been one great move towards curbing this kind of practice. But it should be taken beyond that point. Laws must be implemented. The culture of silence must be broken in the homes. All right? Women should start to talk about it. They should not suffer psychological, emotional pains. They should talk about it. Women organizations must champion the cause of the family by actually speaking out on domestic violence, because it is serious. You want to agree with me that 80% of the women who are married today will tell you that in one way or the other they have experienced domestic violence. And to take that percentage, it is serious, and therefore the practice must be minimized. All right, it must be minimized. I'm being very emphatic on the word minimize, because it's a social problem. As long as society exists, you cannot wipe out violence. But then violence must be minimized to negligible levels so that society can continue to live in peace, in harmony, and that tranquility will bring about development. For if development is going to start and happen and work, it should start from the home. But if violence debars development in the home, it will debar it in the larger society. All right? And so, as we speak on this, I always bring in the developmental aspect of it. Where there is violence, no amount of development will take place. In homes where you find mama and papa fighting, beating up children, there is a problem of development. In societies where we have conflict, serious, violent conflict, you cannot speak of development. So, for development again to happen, we must look at it from this point of view. That in the homes, there must be peace, tranquility. If the home and various families develop within our society, it is sure that our society will develop. But again, it is a practice that is widespread and pervasive, and people must talk about it, organizations must attack it, and they should find ways and means of actually minimizing it.
Thank you for talking to me on Ask the Experts. You've been listening to Ask the Experts, and we've been talking on domestic violence. My expert this week has been Patrick H. Walker, a lecturer at the Department of Sociology, Forabi College, University of Sierra Leone.
Tune into Radio Mount Orel FM 107.3 every Monday after the 8 p.m. news bulletin, and on Saturdays after the 7 a.m. news bulletin for Ask the Expert.